Check the description for the following discount codes. Today we're going to review the Fanatec CSL DD. They're quite exciting entry-level direct drive wheelbase. Now, there are other sort of cheaper entry-level direct drive wheelbases, but this is from Fanatec, a well-established brand. They've already got the DD1, the DD2. They're belt-driven wheels, you know, have been a sim racing staple for years, as have their pedal sets and even their shifter. Handbrake, wasn't really ever a fan of that, a little bit cheap and flimsy in my opinion, but their pedals, their shifter and their other wheelbases and the wheels themselves have always been very well regarded. And for a lot of us, the Fanatec stuff is the sort of level or budget that a lot of us can stretch to, but perhaps can't go any further for the really high-end stuff, except of course their DD1 and DD2, because they are in that sort of top high-end bracket, and a lot of us won't spend, you know, £1,200 on a wheelbase, but we may spend £400 or £500. Now, this is what makes this so interesting. This isn't designed to compete with the Logitech G920 or, you know, the entry-level force feedback wheels. It is quite a bit more money than that just for the wheelbase on its own, and then you've got to get your pedals and your shifter if you want one, and of course a wheel to go on it because it's just the wheelbase. So yeah, it's not that low end. It's definitely still, I'll call it mid-high from a price point really. You know, you would look at this in place of the belt drive offerings from Fanatec and Thrustmaster, the TSPC Racer from Thrustmaster, for example. This would be an alternative to those. It's similarly powered, as in there's 5 Newton meters of torque with the standard power supply, and then if you buy the uprated power supply we get 8 Newton meters of torque. And 5 to 8 Newton meters is where you see the Fanatec belt driven wheels and the Thrustmaster belt driven wheel, their top one, come in at. But of course they are belt driven and they're not direct drive, and we'll talk about that briefly in a minute. But for those of you that don't want to hang around for my waffle as I show you the box and the power supply and all the attachments, the bottom line is, if this was my only wheelbase, if this was what my budget allowed me to buy with a wheel, then I would be more than happy with it. You know, I don't have any complaints. It performs admirably. The torque is enough to have a good time and a lot of fun. You're not missing out on anything, perhaps by spending, you know, more and more as you go up the ladder. So yes, if this was my only wheelbase and that was what my budget allowed, I'd be more than happy with it. Now, let's just briefly talk about the difference. Why would you want a direct drive wheelbase at 5 to 8 Newton meters over a belt driven wheelbase at 5 to 8 Newton meters? And the key, or the clue, sorry, is in the name, direct drive. Our steering wheel literally fits straight onto the motor shaft. There is no belt, there's no cogs, it's literally motor, steering wheel, slotted straight on the front. What that means is we don't get any sort of delay or damping from having a belt or gears. When you have a belt, a toothed belt, or cogs, gears that mesh together, there has to be something called lash, which is basically play that allows these to move and rotate together. If there was no lash, they'd intertwine and they wouldn't be able to move. So what that does is it adds a little bit of play, which equates to a bit of dampening, perhaps a fraction of a second delay between when the motor engages and when the steering wheel that you're holding actually starts to react. This is what you don't have with direct drive wheelbases. The moment that motor reacts, you feel it through the steering wheel. There's no gears, there's no belt, there's no nothing. So as far as technology exists right now, it's as good as it gets from a sim racer's point of view. That instant response without any damping or delay. Now, talking about cogs, with belt-driven wheels particularly, and gear-driven wheels, you can feel a very noticeable cogging as you rotate your steering wheel. And with this, you can grab the shaft here. Not that we should be grabbing our shafts on camera, but there. And you can rotate it, and you can feel, with these, because there's no power to it, you can feel what feels like cogging. It isn't cogging, it's the magnets around the outside of the motor on the inside, but around the outside of the shaft, and you're just feeling it go from one to the other to the other. When it's powered up, just like the DD1 and DD2, you don't feel that. It's completely smooth. And that smoothness is what you really notice, you know, stepping up from a belt-driven wheel or a gear-driven wheel like the Logitech stuff. It's just how smooth, you know, the rotation really is once it's powered. So that's really your differences between direct drive and belt-driven and gear-driven at the same strength. Obviously, the other real difference is you're not capped here at 8 Newton meters. You could buy a direct drive wheel with 20 Newton meters or 30 Newton meters, and that aren't belt-driven or gear-driven wheelbases that offer that sort of power. But that's irrelevant because this is a 5 to 8 Newton meter setup, so we can compare it to the belt-driven counterparts. Now, some of you asked me to do an unboxing, but to be honest, there's so little to unbox. I will show you. This is obviously the retail packaging. This is how it comes. And all that was in this box is, there's a lot of flaps, but I'll just open it. All there is in this box is a load of foam, and then the wheelbase itself, which was in a piece of polythene bag, sorry. You got your instruction manual, you got some Fanatec stickers. Here's our polystyrene. Inside this white plastic box there was the T-nuts and bolts that you can use to secure this to your rig. This was the bag that the wheelbase itself came in. But aside from that, there wasn't really anything else in the box. So I didn't really think it worth doing an unboxing because there wasn't anything in there. The power supplies, of which I've got here, so this is the smaller one that runs your 5 Newton meters, and this is your bigger one that gives you your 8 Newton meters. These just came in separate boxes, which are just laying on the floor over there. Just a white cardboard box, nothing exciting to see there. Oh, and the USB cable came in the main box as well. So that's what you got, your USB cable, your manual, your stickers, your wheelbase, and then these T-nuts. You actually get 4 of them, but one of them's still attached to my rig because it was easier to leave it attached than take it off. There's just a close-up of that. And the way they work is there's 3 channels in the bottom here, very similar to what you would see on aluminium profile rigs. And you slide your T-nuts in like that, and then you set it. You put all 3, and actually you get 4. So I had 3 at the front, I had 1 in the middle at the back there, and you set it on your sim rig, and obviously you just bolt it in place. So that was quite a nice, easy way to attach it. Now, on my GT Omega Titan, which is what I used to test it on, the front 3 had pre-drilled holes, which lined up perfectly, and then I added with a drill a 4th hole at the back because I felt only having 3 at the front would potentially allow for it to tilt on those fixing points. I didn't really like that idea, so I added an additional hole. Again, the Titan has been out long before this has, so they couldn't kind of anticipate that. But a quick 5 minutes with a drill and you've got a fresh hole, and you can use all 4 of these supplied T-nuts, and that held it down perfectly steady. In fact, it performed, you know, really nicely on the GT Omega Titan. It's, for a mid-range cockpit, it's still probably one of my favourite mid-range cockpits. Anyway, that's not what we're talking about today. So that's what we got in the box. That's how you bolt it down to a sim rig. Now, if you wanted to use the included table clamp, which is actually what this box that I'm using to rotate this around on is from, I'll show you how to use that as well. It's a pretty hefty table clamp by all accounts. So what we do is flip this upside down. Make sure you can see that. You can see your three channels there. The bottom of this has a channel on either side and then a hole in the middle. The hole in the middle allows you to fit this piece here, which will in turn give you effectively 3 channels, but obviously lining up here. So you get this make sure you put it on the correct way around with there's rubber on the underside here. In fact, these are reasonably big feet, to be honest. They do grip on a table pretty well. I mean, you'd want them to, really. So you slide that, get it to line up, slide it onto the bottom of the CSL DD. You then grab this piece. You've got some feet that articulate to accommodate perhaps slightly different angles depending on the thickness of your table. And again, they can kind of curve there as well in these recesses here. So it's a reasonably well thought out table clamp, and this just screws into this piece here through this hole in the middle. So I won't obviously put it on a table because it's a bit pointless. You can figure out how that works. We even get this huge, great, I don't know what you call it. It's like an end cap that slots over there to really allow you to torque that down nice and hard. But yes, it does work well. It's a decent table clamp should you be someone that uses a table rather than somebody with a sim rig. So yeah, if you need it, it's there and it works well enough. Again, we just slide it back off like this and we're done. So that is how you fix it to your sim rig. That's how you fix it to a table. I'll give you a little close-up of this in a second. In fact, I may as well give you a little close-up. Now, Fanatec logo on the top. I mean, I'm just saying what you can all see. The quick release on the front that you'll be familiar with. Again, those channels on the bottom there, and some specification. 24 volts, 7.5 amps. That's what you use with your if you want 8 Newton meters of torque. That is what this power supply is rated at from memory. Yeah, 7.5 amps, 24 volts, or 180 watts. That's the maximum this can pull. On the back, you'll see, if you're familiar with Fanatec products, the usual array of ports. The power supply port is the one in the middle at the top, the square one with the 4 pins. That actually looks to me like, if you've ever built a PC, it looks like the 4-pin motherboard connector. It may or may not be. So there may even be perhaps a way to bodge using an old computer power supply to get the 8 Newton meters of torque versus buying the uprated power supply. Perhaps, maybe that's something I'll have a play around with. But then you've got your usual other ports, 2 for the shifter, 1 for the pedals, 1 for the handbrake, and you've got your USB, which will go back to your PC, and then there is a data port as well. I don't actually know what the data port is for, because firmware is all updated through the USB port. Yeah, no idea. Perhaps I should have looked that up before doing the review. Anyway, oh, and you've got a power button on the front there. That power button also cycles through modes, PC mode, Xbox mode, and there was one other mode as well. Pardon me, when I was flicking through it when it was installed. There is a little light that lights up in the power supply there, as in the power supply, in the power button, to show you that it is on and powered. So that is pretty much it as far as looking at it goes. One of the things I don't like, and this isn't just this one, it's a lot of direct drive wheels in general, is how long the output shaft is there that you put your wheel onto. When you're using these on rigs that don't have a lot of forward and backward adjustment, in fact, a bit like the Titan doesn't, for the actual wheelbase or wheel deck, there's like almost no forward or backward adjustment. You can move your seat, you can move your pedals, you can move your shifter all around it, but there's not much in the wheel deck itself. In those situations, with this long arse shaft, it really puts your steering wheel quite far sort of towards your chest and can make it a little awkward sometimes to get things set up exactly where you want. I had the same thing with my DD1, which is over there. When I came from my TSPC Racer to the DD1, I had to move the uprights and everything quite a bit further back to stop the steering wheel being embedded in my chest. But it just seems to be a thing with direct drive wheels. You know, it looks like there's a lot of wasted length out the front here, for want of a better choice of words, whereby maybe it could have been shortened, you know, and saved some of that sticking out ness. Not really a word, but you know what I mean. So yeah, not limited to this. It's just something I see in a lot of direct drive stuff. But yeah, aside from that, this, you know, the sort of build quality is your typical Fanatec build quality. Everything feels solid and heavy. In fact, this feels a lot heavier than I was expecting. It, you know, whilst it isn't as heavy as a DD1 or a DD2, it's a lump, considering there's no steering wheel attached to it. You know, it's just the base. It's a heavy piece of kit. So yeah, and I like the way it looks as well. And when it's fitted on a rig, in fact, I might roll a clip of me doing some dirt rally in a second. In fact, yeah, I'll do that now. So yeah, when it's mounted on the rig, it looks so compact and so small, even compared to belt-driven wheel options. Because with belt-driven wheel options, you have to have the motor in one place with a cog on the end, and then a belt, and then another cog, and then a steering wheel attached to that. It makes the units quite a bit bigger. But as you can see here, whilst I'm whizzing around in Dirt Rally, it looks quite small on my sim rig. But I mean, that compactness is useful if you're short on space, or maybe you want to attach, you know, some fans either side of it for wind simulation, in inverted commas. You know, then you can do the space to do that. So I do quite like the fact that it's compact. Now, using it in use here, the best way to describe this is that it is like it's literally a mini DD1 or DD2 in the way that it feels and the way that it performs. Both with the 5 Newton meter setup and the 8 Newton meter setup, I feel, you know, almost an indistinguishable level of detail difference between that and the bigger brother, the DD1 that I've got in the background there. And I was literally going back and forth from one to the other, doing the same stages in the same cars. You know, Dirt Rally is what I know the best, which is why I did most of my testing in Dirt Rally. I also tried it in Assetto Corsa and R Factor 2, just out of curiosity. But as you all know, I'm most familiar with how things feel in Dirt Rally, so it made more sense for me to spend most of my time in that, on tarmac and on gravel and on dirt and snow and ice and all sorts. So going back and forward, it really does feel just like a lesser powered DD1 or DD2. And that scales back, going from the 8 Newton meter power supply down to the 5 Newton meter power supply. The same thing applies there. You don't lose the detail, you just lose the sort of peak torque spikes that you can get by using the bigger power supply. And to be honest, when I went up to the 8 Newton meter power supply, I actually had to dial the settings down a little bit compared to where I had them using the 5 Newton meter one, because it was just a little bit too high. And it felt, at this point, it felt so close to how I have my DD1 set up, it would almost not be worth having the DD1 over this for the difference. I don't run super high force feedback levels. I try and set up my steering so that it feels like I'm in a car with power assistance, you know, as realistic as I can do, particularly electric power steering, because these are electric motors and they feel very similar to cars with electric power steering. So with my DD1, the way I have it set up, this got so close to how that felt, you know, almost, again, not indistinguishable, but for 90% of the driving that I was doing, this with the 8 Newton meter power supply would have been almost on par with the DD1. Obviously, if you want to crank your force feedback up really heavy and simulate cars with no power steering and things like that, then it wouldn't be able to compete. But I don't do that. You know, I have it set up so it feels like I'm in a car with power steering, you know, and so I don't want it stupidly heavy, because too heavy will make my input slower, you know, and especially in rally where you're doing rapid changes in direction and catching sliders and whatnot, you don't want a really heavy steering wheel, or at least I don't. So that is how it feels. The level of detail is just as good, in my opinion, as my DD1, whether that be on 5 Newton meters or 8 Newton meters. I don't really notice a difference. I mean, technically, maybe there is a fraction of a difference in response times, because this motor may not respond as quickly as the DD1. But if there is, it's not something that I could feel. Speaking of the different motors, let me just give you a close-up of these two power supplies. So they are quite noticeably different in size, and also the cables coming off of them. Look how much thicker this one is compared to this one. Obviously they have the same 4-pin connector on the end because they plug into the same hole. As I say, that looks very much like a motherboard power input, so maybe some bodgery can be done there. But you know, the lesser one, it's literally half, 24 volts, 3.75 amps at 90 watts. And then the bigger one is 24 volts, obviously still, 7.5 amps at 180 watts. Now I believe this is the same power supply as the CSW uses, the belt-driven wheel, but with a different plug on the end. So it may be, I mean, if that is the case, then it may be all you need to do, if you're upgrading, for example, from that wheelbase to this one, is get one of these connectors, which you can just buy online, chop your old barrel plug off, which I think is what's on there, because the pin out for this is actually given on the back of the power supply. So it would be very easy to, you know, convert an old one to work with this and save yourself the 150 euros that I believe it is to upgrade to this power supply. But as I say, even the 5 Newton meter power supply, or 90 watt, whatever you want to describe it as, it's not really Newton meters, but that's what it gives you. Even the experience using that, you won't be disappointed with it. Yes, having the extra 3 Newton meters is massively noticeable. When you plug this bigger one in, straight away it bumps everything up, and if your settings are still the same in your sim, then you notice straight away, wow, the wheel's a lot heavier and a lot stronger. So it is very noticeable, but you don't need it. You can still have, and this is what I was reminded of whilst testing this. I was using this, I was sat in a GT Omega Titan, and I'm using the CSL pedals from Fanatec as well that I've got in for testing, along with an old Thrustmaster TH8A shifter. So very much middle of the range stuff all round. And what I was reminded of was that you can have just as much fun with this mid-range stuff. You know, it's a step up from the Logitech, for example. With this mid-range stuff, you can have just as much fun and get just as much enjoyment as you can having a wheelbase that's twice the price or more, pedals that are twice the price, shifters that are twice the price, and cockpits that are 2 to 3 times the price. It doesn't take away from the fun of flying down a rally stage, you know, it really doesn't. It's still there, and this gives enough detail and enough force feedback for it to be fun. In fact, I'm used to tactile transducers, wind simulation on my main rig over there. The feedback about the terrain that you're going over from this was enough to vibrate my entire rig, and not in a bad way. There was no rattles or anything like that, but I could feel the effects, the force feedback effects that we're getting from this through my rig. Obviously nowhere near as strong as my tactile transducers, but it wasn't the flat, lifeless experience that I was expecting and that perhaps I might have had if I was using a belt-driven setup. This, you know, it puts out enough, both in force feedback and vibration effects, that you get a really good overall experience. And as I say, was reminded that using mid-range stuff that doesn't cost the earth can give you a really good, fun experience. So really, in conclusion, I would have no problem recommending this wheelbase, and obviously you'll need to buy a wheel to go with it. Whether it be on the 5 Newton meter power supply, the 3.75 amp 90 watt one, or if you want to spend the extra 150 and get that sort of extra 3 Newton meters. 3 Newton meters doesn't sound a lot, but that's all, what is that, over 5, it's like 60% more, so it's quite a bump up and you do notice it. But whichever you choose, whichever route you choose to go down, you know, buy it, it comes with a standard one, buy it like that and try it. And if you go, oh, do you know what, I could have a bit more power, then maybe upgrade to the bigger one, you know. But I certainly wouldn't say do it right out the box unless it's within your budget and you just want it to be as good as it can be, then by all means get the more powerful power supply. But people who can't afford it, because it really bumps the price up a lot, or who don't want to spend the money, you're not going to be disappointed with the 5 Newton meter setup. You're still going to have a really good time. You're still going to have really smooth, really responsive, detailed force feedback, from this wheelbase. And that's really all we need to know about it. The experience is good. I set the software, the drivers, to mirror what I did on my DD1, to try and keep everything as parallel as possible and literally switching from one to the other to do this testing, to see how it compares, trying to keep everything else on a level playing field. And they're really my findings. It is like a mini DD1 or DD2, just without the extra girth that a lot of us may never even use. As I say, when I ran this with the 8 Newton meter, the 7.5 amp power supply, I actually had to turn things down a little bit because it was giving me more in places that I didn't want it than what I would normally have from my DD1. And it was only really the big spikes in torque that it was missing. But to be honest, if I tried one of these maybe 6 months ago, or whenever it was I bought my DD1, I probably wouldn't have bought my DD1, because this gives you, for me, and the level of torque that I need and have my DD1 set at, this gives me like 90 to 95% of the experience at less than half the price. This is with the 8 Newton meter power supply, not the 5 Newton meter. And it's a real, I was about to say it's a kick in the balls. It isn't a kick in the balls, but because I sold my Motion platform to pay for my DD1, and I'm glad I've got my DD1, but I would still have been more than happy with this little compact unit, strapped on my rig. If this was my only wheelbase, more than happy with it. So yes, that's my review of the Fanatec CSL DD. It gets a strong recommendation. If it's within your budget, I would definitely choose this over the Thrustmaster belt-driven offering. I believe Fanatec have discontinued their belt-driven offering, so you don't really have that option there now. I haven't actually verified that with Fanatec, by the way. I may be wrong, but that's what I believe is happening. So I can wholeheartedly recommend it, yeah. So, have I covered everything? We've opened the box, we've done a close-up, I've told you how it fixes on, I've showed you the table mounts, the power supplies, the USB cable, I've shared my experience about what it's like to use, showed you all the ports. I think I've probably covered everything there is to cover. So, any questions, as always, stick them in the comments. There will be links in the description. Well, in fact, Digital Motorsport, who I bought my DD1 from, are linked in the description. They will obviously have these should you be in the UK and want to get one. They are very, very fast. Next day delivery. If I remember rightly, I ordered mine on a Saturday afternoon, my DD1, and it arrived on the Monday morning. So super fast delivery, and they're nice guys to deal with as well. But yeah, anyway, enough waffle, Carl. It's a good product. Should you need one, by all means, go and buy one. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, take it easy.